we continue on our path breaking down every single position group at LSU. Now, we've done the entire defense. Might have not been last week, but either last week or week before, we talked about the offensive line in great depth, what I think that we're going to do there. Tonight for LSU, we go to the receiver room. And I know what the national talking point, even the talking point locally, is at the position of wide receiver. How do you replace Malik Neighbors? How do you replace Brian Thomas? It is a big question mark. I'm not going to tell you it's not, because it is a big question mark. When you lose 2 first-round guys at a position group, you gotta think, hey, man, how are you going to replace it? The interesting thing, though, is you got pretty decent production returning in that room. Some very good talent that is going to be in that room. I don't think that you can come out of last season. I don't think that you can come out of games like Alabama, the bowl game against Wisconsin, and not look at Kyren Lacy post-spring and say that, okay, the last times that we saw Kyren Lacy, the dude is developing. Can he be a number 1 wide receiver? Remains to be seen. Last guy that had 500 yards and 7 touchdowns going into a season for LSU was Brian Thomas a year ago. So you're like, Brian Thomas wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver until this past season. Brian Thomas didn't explode until this past season. Is Kyren Lacy going to be that next human being for LSU that you have at that position that's going to ball out? I think that Cortez Hankton has got to get flowers on the developmental piece of what we've seen at this position group. I think that Kyren Lacy is the poster child for that. Because Kyren really showed. He had a couple of big drops. I understand that. He also had some really big catches for you last year, too. I think about the Ole Miss game when you need to go back in there and start scoring at will. The one-handed grab that he had in the back of the end zone on the fade route was a massive score, a big deal. Jane Daniels trust him to come down with it in man-to-man coverage on the outside. I think about the Alabama catch right before half to tie the game going in with Alabama. Hey, man, your defense sucks right now, but Jane Daniels is going off. At the end of the half, Kyren Lacy made arguably the best DB, in my humble opinion, in Caleb Downs, the best DB in the country. He made him look like a freshman. And Kyren won a big-time battle against a big-time premier safety, lining up in the slot. I want to be very high on Kyren Lacy. I want to. You got to see him do it. You got to see the action. Because when you see a player like Kyren Lacy, year 1 in 22, you see the development that he had in 23. You ask the question, can he develop into a guy going into year 3? Can he be that number 1? Now, Kyren, for whatever it's worth, has to be better with drops. He cannot have the crucial drops that he had a year ago. Cannot happen. The big one against Florida State, the big one against Texas A&M. Ironically, the big one against Arkansas, did have one against Auburn. Before we say Auburn game we ran away with it, I will remind you that game was relatively close early. Auburn was coming off of a bye, if I remember correctly. Can he take that next step? 30 catches, 558 yards, and 7 touchdowns for Kyren a year ago, and being the number 3 wide receiver. Kyren is a lot of things. A big body guy that, man, look, he might not be the fastest human being on the planet, but he starts separating from dudes. And that is something that you want to see. I think that he is one of the best players in the country at catching the ball from the line of scrimmage to 10 yards in. The hitch route with him at times has been unstoppable. It was unstoppable at times last year. It was unstoppable for sure in 22 when Jaden Daniels needed a first down. Guys, he went to Kyren Lacy a lot in critical situations to get the catch and get a first down. Can he take that next step? Now, I would remind you that when Kyren Lacy became the number 2 wide receiver in the bowl game a year ago, when Malik Neighbors got the record, went out of the game, no need to play it, Kyren Lacy had 6 catches, 95 yards. Brian Thomas was still playing in that game pretty heavy. Obviously, he caught the game winner for you. But Kyren was a big deal in that game. He has a really good rapport with a quarterback that's been here for 3 years or will be going on to 3 years together. I like that connection. I thought post or during spring, it was undeniable for everybody that was there. This is not my opinion. Go back and watch during spring when Brian Kelly allowed us to be at practices and scrimmages. Kyren Lacy was the biggest talking point during the whole spring. You cannot ignore that. What he did in those scrimmages was undeniable. With what we saw with our eyes. Now, could that be your DB play was really bad? I don't know. I know that Kyren Lacy literally took a hitch route 75 yards to start off a scrimmage because I was there witnessing it. I was standing next to Wilson Alexander from The Advocate, and I'm like, oh, my God. Oh, my God. He comes down with a hitch, breaks 2 tackles, breaks a third one 20 yards down the field, and scores. It's undeniable. And they were going to the ground. Brian Kelly was not playing around with them this spring at all. Not at all. Can Kyren develop into that number 1 guy? We'll wait to see. There are 2 pieces that did see a lot of action last year that were on the team a year ago that I think that can be they have the potential to be very big additions depending on what they do. Let's start off with Chris Hilton Jr. Chris, to me, is somebody that I think we have seen develop in front of our eyes. You know, a guy that was skinny, didn't have a lot of weight on. Because if you look at Chris Hilton now, I mean, okay, he's still slender, but dude's put on some serious muscle. By the way, I'm hearing that Chris Hilton broke a miles per hour record at LSU this summer at running at 23.7 miles an hour. It's what I was told. 23, a record at 23.7. The last time we saw it was 23.3 or 23.4. You got to utilize that elite speed. You have to. You have to give it more action this season. Because, look, you did it with Brian Thomas Jr., who was Chris Hilton's roommate a year ago, I might add. You did it with with Brian Thomas Jr. Now let's try it with Chris. I think Chris has the potential because of how big we've seen with guys with this amount of elite speed take a big step the next year. I think of like guys like Justin Ross. I think of guys like Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy had to play early at Texas before Chris was able to get his chance. But that was more of a necessity. Both guys had kind of some similar traits going into their premier starting seasons. Chris Hilton had 3 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown against Wisconsin, and was, at the end of the game, a go-to guy for Garrett downfield. Chris caught the touchdown, the ridiculous catch that he had in the end zone for the touchdown, and then the big play to start off the 90-plus yard drive with the fade route and man-to-man coverage that he beats, and he's able to make one of the most ridiculous catches that we've ever seen. In back-to-back drives, I might add. It's time for Chris Hilton. It's his time. He's going to get the opportunity to do it. I'm ready to see that for him. Aaron Anderson is the third. Aaron Anderson had a bad year, and I was very high on him. I missed. Wasn't as high as I was on Malik, but I missed. 12 catches, 59 yards. At some point, you got to put your head down and get to work. And I'm not saying that that's not what Aaron Anderson has been doing all offseason, but, man, everything that I hear is about a guy we're going to talk about in just a second, and Zavion Thomas. It's the only thing I hear about, legitimately, at that position. Hey, man, good luck stopping Zavion. Good luck. Okay, good luck. So I don't know if Aaron Anderson doesn't get passed up in the slot by a guy like Zavion. I think that he's going to rotate. There's going to be whoever that third wide receiver is, there's legitimately going to be rotation between 3 and 4. I feel that very strongly. Like if it's Chris Hilton or CJ Daniels, whichever one, even at Kyren Lacy at times, they're going to rotate 4 dudes pretty religiously. Pick your 4. It is what it is. I think they'll do that a lot early in the season. So Aaron Anderson, I think he might have gotten beaten out for a spot. Let's see what Zavion Thomas can do. Now, getting to the 2 guys in the portal that you added, and Zavion Thomas and CJ Daniels. Let me start off with Zavion for just a moment. Guys, like I just mentioned, nobody at that position group, meaning receiver, outside of Chris Hilton, I'm not hearing anything other than Zavion Thomas. It's legitimately all that I hear on a day in, day out basis. Like, look, man, if he puts some things together, if he learns his playbook, gets things down, he is a mismatched nightmare for teams on what we're going to do with Garrett Nussmeier in this offense. 40 catches, 503 yards, and a touchdown a year ago for Thomas in an offense that, guys, let's be honest, with Mississippi State was absolutely bona fidely bad because they were running the air raid one week and legitimately came out in 12 personnel the next and tried to pound the football. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen a coach do. Legitimately the stupidest thing that I've ever seen. But Zavion Thomas is someone who flourished, I thought, in an offense that was really bad a year ago. Zach Arnett got fired because of his incompetence. Mississippi State would have given him a chance. If they would have seen flashes, they would have given him a chance. How you can shine in an offense like that proves to me what not only your actions showed a year ago, but what the coaching staff is thinking of you at the current moment. Can he figure some things out? It's going to be a big deal. CJ Daniels. Look, I think that everybody in this fan base for whatever reason, CJ Daniels has the biggest question mark on him because he comes from a group of 5, a mid-major program. Can he do it in the SEC? He's an addition. I know that he had a ridiculous year at Liberty, had 55 catches, over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns. People are not talking about CJ Daniels this offseason maybe the way that they should because they got to see it. We know he had 1,000 yards last year at Liberty. Can he do it in the SEC? Can he do it at LSU? That is the storyline going into the offseason. And I do think that CJ Daniels is going to be someone early in camp and potentially early in the season that they try to get in the games and go after. Guys, you don't bring a guy in like that and let him sit. Now, he's got some dogs in front of him. He's got some dudes, which we're going to get to the position group in just a quick moment. But in reference to C.J. Daniels, I think the kid's got the ability. I think he had, 8 catches, 87 yards, something like that against Oregon in the bowl game last year. Guys, he's done it against a pretty good defense. A pretty good defense. So it's not like they didn't play some high-level opponents. Let's see what C.J. Daniels can do, but there are going to be question marks to see how he progresses. Let's talk about the room as a whole. The room as a whole, for me, I thought all spring was the one position group I could not get my eyes off of. You know, I was really trying to watch the defensive line during spring, really watch the secondary and some things that they were doing. I couldn't take my eyes off this wide receiver room. Let me tell you why. It's not necessarily all based off of the on-field action as much as it has been the tenacity during drill work, the competitiveness that they show in 7-on-7, the amount of pressure that Cortez Hankton puts on all of his receivers to be great is, for me, why I think Cortez is elite. I really do believe that. I don't like using that word. I do. Because from the start of practice every single day, you're going to have to come in and work. Because if you're not, you're out of there. I thought during the entire offseason that I saw and things that I have heard, there's just not a position group that has that amount of talent in one room that I constantly hear from, whether offseason buzz or something that I've seen with my eyes in camp, that I'm not like, holy shit. Now, is the production going to be there? You're replacing 2 first-round wide receivers. That is a big deal. But I'm going to ask a question that I think could potentially happen in this wide receiver room. Nick Saban made it cool to reload specific positions along the offense and defensive line. Kirby Smart does it with defense right now himself. I don't know how sold I am that you didn't reload at wide receiver and just have dudes. Not sold on it. Now, the production or the amount of production in the Power 5 is like, hey, man, it's a big question mark. I just think that they have been the most influential position group when it comes to being competitive on wanting to be elite. Guys, the amount of pressure that your co-offensive coordinator, Cortez Hankton, puts on those guys is ridiculous. And they say pressure makes diamonds. I just think the development that's going on in that room, we are taking it for granted. I really do. Everybody's got a lot to prove. I'm a talking head. I can be wrong. They all got to prove stuff. I don't feel like I am. I wouldn't have come out here and been as passionate about this wide receiver room as I have been if I'm just not going to sit here and say, hey, man, you got to watch out for him. I think we reloaded. I don't do that often. Now, in my early tenure in doing these shows, I used to come out here and say, yeah, we got this guy and we got that guy. No, you got to put in the work. You got to put in the work. I would not be mad if C.J. Daniels, Chris Hilton, and Kyren Lacy are the first 3 wide receivers that you come out with. Oh, by the way, what are you going to do with Trey'Dez Green? This how quickly does Trey'Dez Green, who, guys, I got to be real with you, I don't know if they don't line up at the boundary, specifically in the red zone, and don't say, hey, big fella, we're coming to you. I don't know that. No, he's been doing some wide receiver drills, though. We'll see. We'll see. You have 150 catches from those 5 guys that I mentioned coming back from last season. 150. It's not terrible. It's not enough through 5 guys, but it's not terrible. If you cut out Aaron Anderson, it's actually a lot better for 4. Is what it is. You do have, of the 4 guys that you think that are going to start, 2,400 yards returning along with 20 touchdowns. It's not bad production to have in that room at all.